Hi guys, my name's Emma and we're gonna need a bigger boat. I was so shocked how much you guys loved my initial stat video about the scariest horror movie of all time that I thought we have to seal the deal, guys. Today we need to get to the bottom of what is the best horror movie of all time. Again, you guys don't need me to tell you this, but it is very subjective, especially what the best horror movie of all time is. And this is different to your favorite horror movie. I don't know about you guys. You have to let me know down below in the comments what you judge a horror movie as being the best of all time by, but I definitely think it's originality, characters, story, and of course, like those aspects like that scene, if you've seen my That Scene videos, that really stand out. But above all, I really do think it has to have an immense change on horror and be something so different and so groundbreaking and just, I don't know, shake it to its very core. Today we're going to talk about what's commonly known as per the stats as the best horror movie ever. So if you think about that, that is the best movie of the horror genre, the one that speaks for us all. If you're going to watch one horror movie, this is it, and this is it alone. So it's got to stand for everything that the horror genre means, which is so hard because horror can mean so many different things to so many different people and it's very overwhelming. Just remember, this is the one that stands for us all. So if you want to make your predictions down below, I asked you guys on Instagram and on Twitter and I got over 200 results on each. One actually from Stuckmann himself. So that's when you know I'm legit. I did a similar structure as last time. I took over 20 websites and this time they were very much horror or film critic focused, which was great. Obviously last time when we were talking about the scariest movie ever, film critics and film enthusiast websites definitely stayed clear of making a claim that something was the scariest, but they had no problem talking about what was the best. And I guess they have their own ranking system within their staff. So we're gonna take all of those websites, chuck them together. Just as last time we did a weighted system when the #1 film got a lot of points and the 10th film, so the least best film, the 10th best horror movie of all time, got a lower score. So we're able to tell clearly what movies stood at the top of the list the most. So if you guys want to guess for the sites, for Instagram and for Twitter, please go down below. They're all very different, so I'm excited to get into these results. And make sure to stay tuned till the end because we have all of the separate lists and then we're going to combine them to find the best horror movie ever. Let's start with the websites. Number 10, we're gonna need a bigger boat. It's Jaws. Do I think that Jaws should be on this list? I don't know. I think that Jaws is a great movie and it's very classic, and in that way it meets all of the criteria that I mentioned before. I do think it made a huge impact on horror, but I don't know if I feel comfortable having I don't know if I would pick Jaws or like, you know, a shark movie to be #1 or in the top 10 of my best horror movies ever. I do think it's been a pop culture phenomenon, but it doesn't really say like horror to me. It says like thriller horror, really high tension. I'm not saying it's not a horror movie. I'm just saying I wouldn't use it as a representative. I don't know, what do you guys think? What subgenre do you think should represent horror? Number 9 is Rosemary's Baby, which I'm so glad Rosemary's Baby got onto a list because I love Rosemary's Baby so much. And I do think it has that cool kind of culty vibe, but also realistic. And I think that this is the great movie that's kind of like a gateway drug, a gateway horror for a lot of people because it is Roman Polanski and people kind of familiar with him. They don't really think it's like full horror until they realize they're in the pit of it. So I do think it's a good gateway horror, and I would probably put it in my top 10, to be honest. Not sure where, but it would be in there. Man. Number 8, this one, it should have been a bit higher, is John Carpenter's The Thing. Everyone loves this movie. Everyone thinks it's a classic, and it's a movie that really did shape horror and shape, I guess, remakes. And also, it was the movie that really scared people to death, and it has so much thought behind it. I really think that this should have been higher, to be honest. Number 7 is Alien, and obviously this is one that kept popping up because it's number 7. I do think, again, this goes down into the classic aspect. I do think it was groundbreaking, and it definitely has the final girl, which you'd hope if a horror was like top 10, it'd be Final Girl, but maybe not. That's kind of slasher. But it is interesting to have a sci-fi in here. I feel like everything has had different subgenres so far. Night of the Living Dead is number 6, and this is why I feel like they're just going for classics. Obviously, again, groundbreaking, got that. And this movie did kind of shape horror as it is today, but it's definitely not in my top 10. I know a lot of people really love this movie and it means a lot to people, but again, it's all about the subgenre. Number 5 is Halloween. John Carpenter's Halloween. I'm very surprised by this as well, because this is, even though it's not my favorite film, which this is not what it's about the best horror movie that encapsulates horror as a whole. I do think that Halloween does do most of what I've been kind of grading these on. I think that it's very original. The structure is quite solid, and the way it changed horror movies, and especially slashers, it really did. And it's so groundbreaking. There's no blood. It's all kind of almost psychological, and it's tension building. I think this one is a huge contender for the best horror movie of all time, even though it's not even in my top 10. I do think that it really changed horror and shaped it into what it is today. And obviously it has a huge following. So I'm very surprised to see this number 5. Number 4 is a movie I can definitely get behind. It's the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I love this movie. It is so creepy, and it's so real, and it's so brutal. And I don't know if I would choose something this disturbing as like being the face of horror. But I guess that's what horror is. It's really disturbing. But you know me, I'm really into my disturbing films. And this one is, I think it's up there being like one of the most disturbing films of all time. So I don't think it's a good one to be like, hey, do you like horror? This is the best horror movie ever made. Watch it. Because it's very polarizing. Number 3 is The Shining. And to be honest, I thought this was going to be number 1, hands down, because The Shining, again, it's so interesting because it's another kind of remake. Obviously, they have the Stephen King adaptation TV series, and he wasn't happy with the Stanley Kubrick version, which we all love this version. But I really felt like it has so many aspects. It has the psychological, it has the really creepy, scary parts. It also has a lot of gore and a lot of violence. And in saying that as well, it's a masterpiece, so I would definitely put this a little bit higher. From there, we have number 2, which is Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 film, Psycho. This film really did start a lot of people loving horror, but also it was a huge building block for horror, and it really changed and flipped up the psychological aspect, and it is very haunting. It is probably the most classic horror, I would say. I mean, Universal Monsters, obviously, but this is the most classic kind of psychological horror that I really would stick with. And I do think it really does belong on this top 10 list. And then we know what number 1 is, guys. I promise this isn't the same on every list. It's The Exorcist. I love this movie so much, and obviously I put it down as thinking it was the scariest movie for me. It won all of those scary movies. Sorry, spoiler if you haven't seen that video. People just love this movie and are so affected by it. Wow, I don't know if I would put someone stabbing their hoo-ha with a crucifix as like the face of horror. I don't know, what do you guys think? Over to Instagram, I asked you guys what is the best horror movie of all time. I swear this one is different to the last list of the website, so don't worry too much about that. But number 10 is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Again, I think this one is super gruesome, but I love this movie. Number 9 is an actual personal favorite for me. This would be on my top 10 horror movies of all time regardless. This is Martyrs from 2008, obviously the original. This movie is jaw-dropping, crazy, violent, also very deep. It really did change a lot, and this is the only movie I've mentioned so far from the 2000s. Everything else had been like 80s prior. So that's really interesting. And I do think this definitely has a place on the top 10 list. For me, it's so hard again, it's so subjective. If you haven't seen Martyrs, it will change your life, and don't look up anything about it, trust me. Number 8 is Alien, which was number 7 in the last list. So I do think that this has a strong contender to go up for the final list. We'll see where it lands. But the next one really surprised me. Number 7 is The Witch. This is a very slow-paced movie, and by any means, I would not put it as the best horror movie ever made. I definitely would not put it as that. I do think it is an acquired taste. A lot of people don't like it. A lot of people absolutely love it, obviously, but I think it's more of a personal favorite for people. I really don't think it belongs on the top 10 best horror movies ever made. Number 6 is The Thing. Obviously, John Carpenter's The Thing. Again, totally understand why that's here, and I think that it really should be higher on both of these lists. Number 5 is something very different. It is Hereditary. I did know that I was going to get a lot more of you guys come and give me that feedback about Hereditary. As I mentioned before in the website articles, we don't know whether those top 10s are old or new, or how much they take into consideration newer films, because I do feel like they just focus on the classics when they're trying to go for like the best horror movie ever. They don't really take into account new movies. And I guess that's a question to you guys. There's such a new versus old mentality within horror and between horror fans. And do you think that it is okay for something from the 2000s to be called the best horror movie ever? I don't know. I'm staying out of this one. Number 4 is The Exorcist. So you're going to be really surprised by the top 3, I think, for this one. But I'm really not surprised it's in the 4th place. I knew it would be up there somewhere. What I am surprised by is number 3. This is a movie we haven't spoken about yet. It's a 90s horror movie. It's Scream. You guys love Scream so much that it got on the 3rd highest best horror movie of all time via Instagram. So congratulations on being original there, guys. I love Scream. I absolutely do, and you guys know I'm not a huge slasher fan, but I absolutely love Scream. I think it's smart, I think it's funny, and I think it's clever, and it really, you know, has a commentary on horror movies. And I think that's the only film in here that's kind of like looking at itself and kind of making fun of itself at the same time as being an ultra serious franchise that kind of took off. So I think that's really cool to be in here. I do think it belongs on the top 10 list, to be honest. From there, we have number 2, which is Halloween, which I am not surprised by that you guys like Halloween because you are the horror fans. These websites, as I said before, some of them are film enthusiast websites, but you as the horror fans, I know how much you guys love Halloween. And number 1 is The Shining, which is, again, expected. I was expecting The Shining, to be honest. I'm really glad to see that as number 1 on one of these lists. Okay, Twitter, let's go. This is gonna be a little bit different. There's a movie on here that was not mentioned in any other one, and it's actually the number 10. It's A Nightmare on Elm Street. A Nightmare on Elm Street, of course, is a classic slasher, and Freddy Krueger, he is one of the iconic slasher villains, of course, but he has a little bit of an edge to him because he does have that weird kind of paranormal, surrealist vibe where he can get into your dreams, he can tear things apart, and he's just so kooky and campy, and it's just insane. And I do think that he encapsulates a whole chunk of horror, and he really did impact how villains were seen, but I don't think that he would go really above any other slashers, aka Halloween. Number 9 is very surprising for Twitter. Also, I didn't mention that Twitter got over 300 votes. So thanks for all that data, guys. Number 9 was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was very surprising that I didn't get a lot of entries on this due to the impact it had on other people on Instagram and obviously the websites. Number 8, 7, and 6 are all ties. It's Psycho, Rosemary's Baby, and Hereditary. Those films are so different. Do you know what is really funny though? They all feature like a woman struggling. But besides all that, on Twitter, I do think it's really interesting that these 3 got the same amount of votes because they're so different. Obviously different decades and completely different storylines. Very interesting. Number 5, again, is Alien. I'm surprised to see this so high on every single list. I don't know if you guys are. Number 4 is The Exorcist. Again, a high contender, but it's not getting in the top 3 on Twitter. Now, this is a top 3 I can get behind. Number 3 is Halloween, right? Number 2 is The Shining. And number 1 is The Thing. These are horror movies that have all impacted and changed the industry in such an original way. Each and every one of them was so original and so different storylines. And also, like, I feel like the epicness of The Shining really puts it up there as like the best horror movie ever made because it's so grand and there's so many different aspects and theatrics that went into it. The performances, obviously like the blood, all those kind of scenes, it's so memorable. I think that's the same as The Thing for a lot of people, although it's a little bit more of like a tension building fear. Where The Shining is just like a psychological landmine. I do think The Thing is something that people took away and they were really scared by, so for them it stood as like the best horror movie of all time. But here we are, guys, we're at the final countdown, the moment you've waited for. I'm about to name the best horror movie ever made. So for this list, I've taken all of the articles and I've just taken the number 1 spots. I've taken your 500 plus votes. I love that you guys did GIFs for all of them. It made it so easy to transcribe. And I put them all into a spreadsheet. I've kind of shoved them in there, and now we have a top 10. Number 9 and number 10 are both tied, and this is Psycho and Rosemary's Baby. Again, both super classic films that really had a psychological aspect to them. Number 8 is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'm glad this is on the top 10, I have to say. I love this movie, but I'm kind of glad it's a little bit lower on the list because, as I said before, it's so gory and so disturbing and so gruesome. For me, it doesn't have that epicness that the best horror movie ever made should have. Everyone from the 90s, give yourself a pat on the back because we got there. Number 7 is Scream. Yay! I'm just happy that something from the 90s got in there. You guys could have picked It, you could have picked Misery, but we went with Scream. I'm okay. As long as something from the 90s is in there, I want something from every decade, that's good with me. Speaking of you newbies, I can't believe how many of you were also as blown away by Hereditary as I was. This gets the number 6 place on the list. And she really tried, guys. She really tried to get in there. Sigourney Weaver in Alien has got the 5th spot. Surprising turn of events here. The Exorcist, the winner, is number 4 on this list. So this is the 4th commonly known best horror movie of all time, The Exorcist. It might be the scariest horror movie of all time, but it's the 4th best horror movie of all time, which is still really impressive. Here we go, guys. The top 3. Halloween got the 3rd spot, which I am totally happy with. The Thing got the 2nd spot, and can you guess what got the 1st spot? The Shining. I'm totally happy with this top 3, even though they're all kind of like American iconic horror movies, which I mean this whole list is really, but I'm really happy with The Shining winning. I don't know why, I just feel like The Shining has the epicness. And I totally can get behind that. What do you guys think of this list? Do you think that The Shining is the best horror movie ever made? I'd love to see your thoughts down below in the comments. Do you guys like these stats videos? I know I had to come back to at least do the best horror movie ever, but let me know by giving a thumbs up if you do like them, because I have 2 more ideas that I can do them on. But if they're getting boring, that's fine. I'll stop here. Thank you so much for stopping in today. That was a lot to get through. I know it was a lot of stats. It was a lot of hours combining them all. So I really appreciate you stopping by and watching this. If you do want to subscribe, I do 2 videos every single week. Just some helpful guides to watching horror, some reviews, and some other cool bits I'm sure you'll like. Hit the button down below, and I'll talk to you guys very soon. Stay spooky, guys. Bye. So that's when you know I'm legit. Hi, Chris. I better cut that out.